We've taken a look at several vintage Japanese laptops over the years, but I got curious about what a more modern machine from that country would be like. So let's check out one from the early 2010s, and from a manufacturer you may not be expecting. I picked up a Panasonic CF-S10 from Yahoo Auctions Japan. It dates back to 2011, so while it's not exactly vintage, it exists in that weird gulf where it's certainly showing its age, but still has some life left in it for basic tasks. It was sold as working, and the seller that refurbished it was seemingly a bit optimistic in that they installed Windows 11. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. While not terribly common worldwide, Panasonic's laptops are a popular choice in Japan, especially its mainstream Let's Note series. They also illustrate some of the peculiarities of the way that country does business, as machines like this one were typically seen in office environments. The front edge is straightforward enough, with a power switch, Wi-Fi toggle, and audio jacks. The left side sports two USB 2.0 ports, as well as HDMI. Further back is a plastic panel containing an Ethernet jack, but notice the blank space next to it. Some configurations of this laptop could be had with a modem as well. Dial-up in 2011 had become uncommon, but that's not really what the modem was for. Rather, its primary use was sending and receiving faxes. For as advanced of technology that's come from that country, Japan still uses fax machines extensively, even a decade after this laptop was made. So I'm actually kind of surprised it didn't include a modem, though another legacy port on the right side did make sense to see. The world had moved on to flat panel monitors by the 2010s, but there were plenty of conference rooms whose AV technology was lagging behind. So a common use for the VGA port on this machine would have been to connect to a projector. Other connections on the right side included an SD card slot as well as an expansion card slot and another USB port. I was disappointed to see it was USB 2.0 as well, and that means this is a lower spec version of this model. Higher end ones offered USB 3 here instead. And as for specs, this particular laptop shipped with an Intel Core i5 of some sort, along with Windows 7, at least as far as the palm rest stickers are concerned. The laptop powered on just fine and booted to Windows 11. Slowly, of course, given its age and what I suspected were pretty low specifications. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it came set to Japanese, but it had also been preloaded with some common applications like LibreOffice and Google Chrome. Conveniently, it also included a copy of CPU-Z, so I could see what kind of power this Panasonic was packing. Not great, but not awful. A dual-core i5-2520M clocked at 2.5 GHz. Being from the Sandy Bridge generation, it was definitely unsupported for Windows 11, so the seller must have used one of the available workarounds to shoehorn that OS on here. It doesn't look like any of the hardware had been upgraded on this laptop, as it also only had 4 GB of RAM in the form of a single stick of DDR3. You could squeak by on Windows 10 with that, but 11 would be pushing it. Also showing its age is the integrated Intel HD Graphics 3000 video. There was no option for a discrete GPU in this model. The RAM was definitely a bottleneck, but here was the biggest one. The pre-installed copy of Crystal Disk Info reported the hard drive was a 320 GB mechanical model running at 5400 RPM. Given how cheap SSDs have become, one would think the seller would have dropped one in, but as we'll see later, there's likely a good reason they didn't. But that doesn't mean I can't. I was curious how much of a performance improvement there'd be with more RAM and an SSD. Could an unsupported machine this old be usable with Windows 11? I started by removing the battery, which was a lithium-ion pack rated for about 12 amp hours and impressively was still holding a decent charge. I couldn't find a service manual for this machine, so I was on my own to figure out how to take it apart. This access panel on the left side looked like it could be where the hard drive sat, but it turned out to just be for the expansion card slot. I was surprised to see that it's a PC card slot, also known as PCM-CIA. A newer technology called Express Card had been around since 2003, so seeing the older standard on this machine is, I guess, just another nod to the legacy technology it caters towards. I was starting to worry that I'd have to do more serious disassembly to find the drive, but then I spotted a suspicious-looking panel inside the battery compartment. I took out the 2 screws securing it, then found the drive inside a hidden bay. This is a clever place to put it, but I was disappointed to find that the drive itself was just rattling loose inside. Turns out it needs a caddy in order to fit properly, which was missing. My guess is that the original had been removed when the laptop was recycled, and the seller who refurbished it just threw in whatever they had on hand. This laptop only seems to support SATA 2 speeds, so a spare 128GB SSD I had would be plenty. While it wouldn't be a problem for it to be loose inside the laptop, I still wanted to secure it somehow. Without the caddy, the next best option I had was to apply some foam tape to the drive to take up the space. I got it connected to its ribbon cable and slid into the bay, then added a piece of foam to the door to really hold it in place. That took care of the storage upgrade, so the only one left was the RAM. I found that the memory in this Panasonic was a mixed bag. The good news is that it was easy to get at through a hatch on the bottom, and that there were 2 slots. The bad news is that the lower of them isn't accessible this way. To swap that module, you have to disassemble the whole machine. Good thing then that I just needed to snap in another 4GB stick. While the laptop was fairly clean when it arrived, I took the opportunity to wipe up some of the remaining dirt and grime. This machine showed some signs of wear in the form of scuffs and a small dent in the metal panel on the back of the screen, but otherwise it seems to have been well taken care of. I powered it on to confirm it detected the upgrades I'd installed, and thankfully it did. All 8GB of RAM and the new SSD. The BIOS setup conveniently let me switch it to English so I could explore the rest of the options, but there wasn't anything particularly interesting. Except for this, a power on counter showing that it's been used for a cumulative 89 days or so, which feels awfully low for an office PC. I plugged in a USB flash drive with the Windows 11 installer and waited while it booted. The machine's lack of USB 3.0 was a big bummer. But eventually it got into the Windows setup program where I encountered an error I was expecting, that this hardware wasn't compatible. There's an easy enough workaround though by adding a few registry keys to tell setup to skip its compatibility checks. I wouldn't recommend doing this to run Windows 11 on hardware this old though, and we'll see the real reason why in a bit. But that hack was enough to let the installation continue, and loading Windows was otherwise uneventful. Another annoyance of Windows 11 is its requirement to sign in with a Microsoft account, which I didn't want to do. Thankfully, there are a few ways to bypass this, so you can create a local account instead. And after that, everything seemed to work fine for the most part. I was able to get online and download a better web browser, and while it certainly didn't feel like a fast laptop, the RAM and SSD were enough to make the machine reasonably usable if your expectations were set appropriately. But it's still not a great idea, and for one big reason: drivers. I was lucky in that the most important ones, like video, sound, and networking, were available. But there were another half-dozen devices listed where that wasn't an option. Unless a particular component was used in a newer device that's officially supported, there's no impetus for manufacturers to write Windows 11 drivers for older hardware. And likewise, there's no guarantee that Windows 10 drivers will work correctly. One missing driver that caught my attention referred to WiMax, and there was a corresponding sticker on the palm rest. WiMax was a network technology launched in the mid-2000s meant to provide mobile internet access, faster than cellular data offered at the time and longer range than what Wi-Fi could handle. It never saw mass adoption though, as the transition to 3G cell networks offered better speeds and was much more cost-effective for service providers. But the final and perhaps most amusing quirk about this laptop is something that's hidden in plain sight. The palm rest advertises that it can read and write DVDs and CDs, but there's no obvious slot or tray for them. On the right front edge is the eject switch, and sliding it reveals the secret. The palm rest itself is the door for the drive. Optical Media wasn't completely dead in 2011 when this laptop was made, but it was definitely on its way out. Except, like with fax machines, Japanese businesses still regularly used them. This Let's Note is otherwise a competent and somewhat compelling laptop. For as full-featured as it is, it's also compact, with a 12-inch LCD sporting a resolution of 1280 by 800. The keyboard feels a little cramped as its keys are smaller than normal, but it has a solid feel and doesn't take long to get used to. Panasonic's signature round trackpad works well enough, but the buttons are a bit mushy and, strangely, it doesn't seem to support two-finger scrolling, though that could also be one of the Windows 11 driver limitations. The machine is surprisingly lightweight. It feels like the battery makes up half its mass, and even the power adapter is fairly compact, though I am a little suspicious of it. Even though it's rated for a wide range of input voltages and frequencies, it got hotter than I'm comfortable with. Thankfully, the input jack on the laptop is a normal barrel plug, so finding another one shouldn't prove too difficult. Finding one of these laptops for yourself isn't quite so easy though. Outside of Japan, Panasonic's notebook offerings lean towards its Toughbook line of rugged models. And interestingly enough, apparently a version of this CFS10 was sold in the US as a Toughbook, where it got decent but not great reviews. A better choice at the time was the ThinkPad X220, at least if you didn't need the extra durability. I picked this machine up for a compelling price, the equivalent of about $35 US. The seller appears to specialize in offering refurbished computers for low prices, something I find commendable. Their margins are likely tight though, thus the lack of upgrades. Throwing in more RAM and an SSD would probably have doubled the cost. The inclusion of Windows 11 is a questionable decision, but at least it's a legitimate license, as it's still possible to upgrade a Windows 7 product key for free. At least for now. But would I recommend you seek out one of these? Probably not. I'm a weirdo with a soft spot for small Japanese laptops, and this machine faces stiff competition in the used market, especially when you factor in the cost of shipping, which ran me about $100. For that kind of money, you could get a used machine that's much newer and, if you're lucky, could actually be officially supported by Windows 11. I'm just glad I got to experience this one as an interesting hybrid of modern and legacy technology.